Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our CICA Summit 21. My name is David Carney, and I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome you to today's keynote presentation and Catalyst panel discussion for day one of our summit. I would like to start the summit by obviously an acknowledgement of country, and in the spirit of reconciliation, the Career Industry Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar from the lands of the Whadjuk people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in the session this afternoon. Just some housekeeping before we get underway today. Just to let you know that this session is being recorded, so if for whatever reason you do experience any technical issues through the course of the presentation, we would ask in the first instance that you just try refreshing your screen. If that doesn't work, you can log out of the session and then back in with the link that you have been provided. Throughout the Catalyst panel discussion this afternoon, we'll be using two buttons which are available for you to use. The chat button is for comments. So if you wanted to post any comments about either anything that the panel members might be saying, or you want to contribute to the discussion, we would ask you to use the chat button. If you have questions, however, so if you would like to ask a specific question to either the whole panel or to a specific panel member, we would ask you to use the Q&A button, not the chat button. It's just easier for us to be able to get and answer those questions for you. We are on social media this afternoon, so if you did want to post anything on Twitter, we would ask you just to use the hashtag CICA Summit 21. To open our summit, I would now like to welcome our President, Megan Fritsch.
Hello and welcome to the CICA Summit 21. As President of CICA, not only am I proud, but I'm also extremely excited about what lies ahead over the next 3 days and this CICA Summit 21 as we put a spotlight on the role and future of career development at a time when education and employment policies seek to widen choices and create equitable systems that can respond to varying needs across the lifespan. Summit 21 is structured around 4 themes of support, scalability, sustainability, and standards. Support and standards have been long-standing themes in career development, nationally and internationally, that continue to have contemporary relevance. Scalability and sustainability are more recent concerns to emerge in the field, especially in the context of the economic and labour market impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, the rapidly changing labour market as a result of technological and scientific changes, and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The lineup of speakers and presenters are world-class and include well-respected international experts such as Deirdre Hughes, OBE from DMH and Associates from the UK, and Serena Hopkins from the Canadian Career Development Foundation. Furthermore, we are bringing key government and industry stakeholders along with professional career practitioners onto panels to unpack the keynote presentations, focusing on the Australian context through a facilitated Catalyst discussion. I would like to personally thank David Carney, CICA Executive Director, for being the driving force behind delivering the 2021 summit. David has spent countless hours for the inception to implementation to deliver upon this mammoth project. We have over 1,200 delegates attending the keynote and Catalyst panel sessions and 40 invited delegates who will be coming together on Wednesday and Thursday in our facilitated, curated group design sessions. Each and every one of you are leaders and key influencers within the career development industry. Together, I look forward to the opportunity we have to share, debate, discuss, and ultimately shape the future of career development in Australia. Thank you and enjoy the summit.
Thanks very much, Megan. As you would have noticed from the information that we provided you prior to today's session, because of the time difference between the UK and also Australia, the keynote presentation provided by Deirdre was actually pre-recorded. And so that was provided to you via a link for you to be able to view. What we would do, however, is we would like to actually take you through that particular presentation as a summary before we start our Catalyst panel discussion. So Deirdre made some really interesting points in her keynote, and this particular sketch diagram will be provided to you post the summit as well. But I think she started by talking obviously about the pandemic and the fact that the pandemic obviously has thrown not only the world into chaos, but has changed dramatically the situation in relation to job security and in particular into insecurity. And I suppose she also made the point that in Australia, we've been somewhat lucky that we've not been impacted to the same extent as Europe and other countries. She spoke about, however, that the pandemic did exacerbate pre-existing trends in poverty and inequality, and also about income inequality, particularly which was already on the rise. She then went on to say that the pandemic has provided an opportunity for a time for change in career development services like never before. And to be sustainable, scalable, and to maintain standards requires new and existing blended ways of working to provide a safety net. She spoke about certain groups who have been adversely affected, namely women, ethnic minorities, disabled people, and particularly people who are most vulnerable in our society, including minority ethnics, young people, and adults. And we found, and she said that they have found that these particular groups often face greater barriers to moving into work and to changing jobs, and that older people more than ever are now likely to find it particularly difficult in re-engaging in the workforce. She then changed tack to talk about young people, and she spoke that today young people are the most ambitious generation ever. She talked about higher levels of education being associated with lower levels of adult unemployment. She also spoke about the fact that issues to do with decent work inclusion, career support, places and spaces are really key elements throughout this particular summit and around our thinking about how we tackle these issues moving forward. She also wanted to share a comment which I thought was worth pointing out from the OECD. And this is in relation to obviously the return on investment, which she made significant case for. She went on to say that the OECD said that unless we can demonstrate the link between education and wealth creation, that education will remain a footnote in the discussion of finance and treasury ministers. I think that's a particular point that's worth us noting in our reflections in relation to the summit. She spoke about the fact that there was actually a strong evidence base around career development, and that existing evidence has been anchored in psychology and in social sciences and in education, and indeed today also in economics. So the challenge, I think, for us in Australia is obviously that return on investment opportunity in investing in career development and career guidance. She then went on to look at different levels throughout the lifespan, and we started with childhood and education. She highlighted that we know for sure that career-related learning in primary school is a good thing. and she went on to talk about the study that she was involved with in 32 primary schools in 7 of the most deprived wards in Derby City in East Midlands. She also made reference of the fact that the feedback from the children when they actually received career-related learning intervention showed that they had added key skills and increased their skill development. And this was collaborated by their teachers. Interestingly, though, the statistic which she pointed out was that whilst 97% of the children agreed with the statement that girls and boys can do any job, high levels of agreement around jobs identified by boys and by girls showed that there was an unconscious bias in their preferences, and that many of the girls were looking at hairdressing and the males were highlighting football. She spoke about some recent work in relation to the OECD, and in particular the work that Anthony Mann is undertaking in relation to indicators on career readiness. There are concerns about teenagers' career uncertainty, and the most powerful figure that she pointed out is that career uncertainty in young people has risen by 81% across the OECD since the turn of the century. The PISA data from these studies showed that often teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds have lower levels of ambition than their advantaged peers. So how do we go beyond managing our outputs to enabling outcomes? How do we know if provision will work in difficult economic situations? She also highlighted a study by World Schools and the OECD. And that was talking about questions asked around, did they receive career guidance? Did they receive it at school, and did they find it useful? And the impact on career attitudes made a difference if they got career conversations and career interventions took place. She also highlighted a study that had been undertaken in the UK around career guidance, which showed that for every pound that Treasury invested in career guidance, there was a return on investment of 4.4, which showed that the investment does actually work. She made an interesting point about the balance being somewhat skewed in the sense of vocational education and training and higher education. And she challenged us to make sure that we got this balance right. She also highlighted the value of part-time work. And she indicated that the research showed that an increase in part-time work for young people whilst in school was having a significant impact on their ability to increase their earnings by the age of 30, and also be unlikely to be in further education, not to be in further education in ages 16 to 18. Towards the end of her presentation, she turned to the great attention of adults and the need post the pandemic not for us to forget the adult population, which has increasingly going to find it difficult to re-engage in a post-COVID workforce. And that how do we support these particular people? She threw out the challenge around bringing together careers, mental health and wellbeing, and the need to greater align these services. And when we look at the evidence base, which shows that a one-stop shop approach can actually fit together to make a difference around people's livelihoods, dignity and respect. She also spoke about the need in a post-COVID world for digital competencies of career practitioners being a major issue, and how well we help to ensure that the people that we work with as career practitioners also have those digital competencies to be able to access the most basic of services, including career information. And I think she left us with some interesting points to consider. She said, think about where the gaps are in your opinion. What ideas do you have for strengthening the weak areas? And what would be your priorities for further investigation? So I might bring our panel in now, ask them if they could turn their cameras on for us. And I'm going to ask each of them just to give a brief introduction, but just to let you know, on the panel this afternoon, we have Dr. Lizzie from Victoria University, Sara Caplan from PwC's Skills for Australia, Saxon Phipps, who is the founder of Year 13, and Leela Darvell, who's from the Victorian Department of Education and Training. So I might start with you, Sara, if you could just sort of give us a bit of a brief introduction about you and where you sit sort of in this space. And I think just before we do start the discussion, it's worth pointing out to our participants that each of our panelists today have been asked to represent their own views. They're not necessarily, we haven't asked them to sort of put a filter over them about what CICA would expect them to say. So we're very open to hearing fresh ideas and their perspectives. And as I said at the outset, we would very much encourage you to get involved as well. So if you do want to use that chat button or post a question, feel free. Thanks, Sara.
Thanks, David. Sara Caplan. I'm a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I lead most of the work that we do in skills and employment and a lot of the work in the vet sector. And as David mentioned, I'm the CEO of PwC Skills for Australia, which is one of the skills service organisations here in Australia that works with employers and industry to look at what's happening in each industry. What does that mean for skills? And do we have the right vocational qualifications such that people get trained in the right things so they can get a job or stay in a job? It's a very fast moving area at the moment. There's been a lot of change due to COVID and a lot of new skills are emerging. So it's a very interesting area to be in. A little bit of history. I've been here in Australia for about the last 7 years. You can probably tell from my accent that I originally came from the UK. I used to actually work with Deirdre Hughes when I was over there because I did very similar things there. And I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to her views on career education, career development there, and thinking about the parallels here, which I'll talk about a bit later.
Thanks, Sara. Saxon, I might throw to you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank David and CICA for inviting me to participate today. I'm always humbled to be part of such events. As suggested, my name's Saxon Phipps. I'm the founder and co-CEO of Year 13. We're an edutech platform which services over 1.6 million young Australians with the school to work transition, focused on education, employment, experiences, gap years, and we do a lot of reporting and work with federal and state government departments around policy and program development. I guess my experience comes from my own transition from high school. This is a few years ago now, in which I left the ecosystem of the schooling system very disorientated and disheartened as to who I was going to be or what I was going to be. And it was through my own experiences and seeing that this is happening to a number of different people across my cohorts was really the conceptions of Year 13 being a platform which really helped students throughout that decision-making process. Kind of fast forward 10 years, we're a remarkably different business. We're now very data-driven around creating effective communication and strategies around employment, education, training, and data and decision-making. Obviously, as Deirdre highlighted in her presentation, the role in which technology has had across a number of different industries has been quite prevalent, and the fourth industrial revolution is something that we've got a major focus on. So I've got a couple of key discussion points, but I guess I'll be representing the youth of for this forum. I'm not too young anymore, so I can wear that hat, but I'll be using a lot of research from our 1.6 million users, and we've produced a number of different reports over the years. So hopefully I can wear their hat well. Thanks,
Saxon. Always young at heart. Always young at heart.
That's what I think as well.
Leela, I might throw to you. Are you just on mute, Leela?
Difficult to follow the footsteps of Saxon and Sara, but I'll try. So my name is Leela Darvell. I manage the Career Education Unit in the Department of Education and Training in Victoria. My background, I trained as a careers practitioner. I trained as a teacher first. I taught in a suburban school in Melbourne, and then started training as a careers practitioner and worked for a number of years as a careers practitioner, and realised I found my passion in life, and very privileged to sort of keep working in this sort of area. So the Career Education Unit is part of a newly formed task force in Victoria, the Senior Secondary Pathways Reform Task Force. This task force has come about as a result of a review that was conducted in the last year and a half to look at senior secondary schooling. And what the review found was it is really, really important that young people have early access to vocational applied learning right throughout their secondary schooling. So this task force is part of set up to design, develop and implement reforms, transformative reforms to improve the skills and work readiness of young people. So it's great to sort of listen to Deirdre in a presentation talking about career readiness and work readiness, lift the quality and the perception of vocational education and training, and to help more young people access high quality programs and to give them the skills that they will need to more successfully transition into further study and education and training, and then into employment and become productive. So really looking forward to the discussion today, and also to sort of find out from the other presenters and also from the people who are out there what some of their burning issues are. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Leela. And Lizzie.
Hello everyone, and thanks David. So I'm Lizzie Knight. I'm a research fellow at Victorian University, as David said, and I research career transitions and vocational education and higher ed, drawing on my background as a certified professional career practitioner. And so where I'm based is at the Centre for International Research on Education Systems, and I think that's a really good indication about some of the work I do, the government research and contract research and academic research, as we take a systemic view and informed by, as Deirdre said, social justice and equity, and that's a real really core part of the research work we do at the centre. And I'm just delighted to be here with this wonderful panel, so thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Lizzie. I think to start the discussion today, we've asked the panelists to identify what their key takeouts were from Deirdre's presentation. So from their own perspective, so I've obviously given an overview of the actual presentation, but I might just ask them to sort of give us just a very quick takeout of what their takeouts were from some of what Deirdre had to say. So I might throw back to you, Lizzie, and if you can kick us off.
Thanks very much, David. And I just really came away energised and delighted from Deirdre's talk. And I followed her work for some time. And I think that the engagement of someone of her stature to comment on policy is really useful. And I think that some of that energy came from sort of understanding and thinking about how important career development is in Australia and is in the international space, and how it can implement all areas of and all domains of policy and really have a kind of halo effect on a lot of different kind of traditional ideas of where we think career sits. For example, education, employment, and very important, but also in terms of moving to newer areas like well-being and sort of public health, and thinking about career education as a wider concern. And I think that Deirdre's references and to the importance of career development and attentiveness to issues of social justice, particularly disadvantaged groups, and she went into such a lot of detail about that, I think was really useful. And I think that there's a growing interest in research on career guidance and career development for social justice purposes. I think also I felt very lucky to be living in Australia, having finished school in Wales, which was mentioned a couple of times, and so I felt very proud as a half Australian, half Welsh person. But I think that in Australia that we have been lucky, not just because of the pandemic and how we've worked through that, but also because we've had such a strong base in career development in the 20 years of the professional standards, which has really given us a structure in which to develop services in a range of very innovative ways. And I'm sort of working through the 4 S's, if you can't tell. And so I thought that the standards sort of gave us a structure for that future scalability and future scalability in lots of different policy areas. And I think that was really interesting, Deirdre, talking about engaging with economics, engaging with ROI. And I think sometimes we worry about talking about funding and money and what the impacts of things are. But I think increasingly our engagement and impact has been metrics being collected, and that can only make sort of career development more powerful. And then finally, I think that I thought that the messages from Deirdre about making career development sustainable in both the UN SDG 2030 targets, but also sustainable, and so we can not go from a sort of boom and bust cycle that has been sometimes internationally and occasionally in Australia. Part of the policy landscape for career is really important, and generally I thought that I really liked how she finished with a combination of the importance of qualitative and quantitative research, which is a great passion of mine and where I work at the Centre for International Research. So that's my takeaways.
Thanks, Lizzie. Leela, would you like to share your takeaways?
Where do I start? I mean, in that half-hour presentation, there's just so much that Deirdre managed to pack in to her presentation, and sort of lots of little bits that we need to take away and really sort of look at very closely. I really liked the idea of a career safety net. The balance between higher education and VET, which I think is particularly relevant to Australia, because I think there's an imbalance now, and I know that we are, I think just not nationally, but states and territories, and particularly in Victoria, we're trying to sort of address that imbalance, exposing young people to vocational applied learning from an early age, and getting to the hearts and minds of parents is sort of, higher education is not the holy grail, particularly with the rapidly changing world of work, that the pandemic is actually, what it's done is actually accelerated and accentuated the need for these employability skills and vocational applied learning skills. So we really need to sort of get to the hearts and minds of our young people and our parents in particular, to sort of make sure that they understand that there's not the end of the world for young people to do vocational education and training. There's a lot there for them to sort of access and then build on and articulate into higher ed if they want to. The other thing that I took away from Deirdre was how we need to increase opportunities for our disadvantaged, those without social capital. We need to level the playing field. And I think we're very lucky in Australia in that it's a small country, it's a large country with a very small population compared to other countries. But when I look at what's happening in career ed at the national level, at our states, all the different states and territories, what they're doing, particularly for young people in schools and so on, I'm really proud. We can always do better, and I think we need to keep striving. The other, my takeaway from Deirdre is mental health and the importance of career education, career development as a really good intervention, but not with mental illness, but for people with mental health. And some really good research coming out of Canada, David Radikoff, for instance, the book that he's published. And I think we don't do enough of this. And this is an area that I think we really, really need to focus on. And I'll finish off by saying my other takeaway from that is the importance of starting early meaning primary. And she gave a very good example of the disadvantaged young people and the takeouts from that. So there's two things. One is gender perceptions that are set early, but not just gender perceptions. Young people from who grow up in households where there is long-term unemployment, intergenerational poverty, and so on, they don't have that role modeling to start building their aspirations from a very young age. So I think starting career education in primary schools is really, really critical. And it's an area that I think we need to get into in Australia. Thanks, David. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Leela. Saxon, I might throw to you. Oh, you're just on mute, Saxon.
Pardon me. Kind of mirroring what Leela was just saying, there was a number of different parts of it to have to dissect, but I thought it was really interesting, Deirdre's approach, especially kind of tying in some philosophy into the big picture of what career services really are. I think something which to draw it back even further is the real purpose behind education and what it really means to be able to, inspire a young person. And I've done a lot of work, and Sarah, has been a topic of conversation for a while, has been, what enterprise skills really are. And, skills can't just be painted over an ugly part and made them lesser to a value of a qualified degree or a certification, but like having someone actually identify what their intrinsic values or intrinsic skills are at a younger age is something which I think is fundamentally important towards not only the development of an individual in terms of educational aspirations, but also character virtues and character development. And I think what overlays that is some of the research which we've done in the past has found that 43% of students are leaving the Australian school system still having no idea what they want to do with themselves. Running off Deirdre's point that 97% of young people, or adolescents, are saying that there's no gender role, they don't see any gender roles. To kind of overlay that, 87% of young people said that they agree with the statement, "I love learning." 75% see themselves as tech savvy. So as Deirdre touched on in terms of these industrial revolutions, of what it means in terms of what the digital economies are going to mean to traditional industries. But one of the big statistics that always stands out to me is that 76% of students and young people, specifically Gen Z, say that they identify success as pursuing a passion. So if we can actually take those key concepts that Deirdre has highlighted in terms of this, they identify as being tech savvy and open-minded, that we have got this digital influence, so using data to inform decision making and what that means towards labour markets, looking at the philosophy around intrinsic values and intrinsic skills, and highlighting that someone who may be from a disadvantaged area might be quite a good problem solver or a creative thinker, and validating that individual towards then making more relative steps towards that decision. I think we have to look at the influence which social media has had on the psychographics of this generation. And what I mean by that is that I'm sure many of us here would have seen The Social Dilemma and what that presented in terms of this consistent sense of validation. So I'm just going to close these. This consistent sense of validation that young people are seeking. I think that by taking that and actually validating an individual within the schooling ecosystem and towards career progression and highlighting those enterprise skills, it actually gives a purpose behind education, and it gives students an ability to be able to make those decisions. And as career services and career advice isn't exclusive to just young people, it is something that we are consistently needing to go back to every 5, 7, 15, 20 years. This would be a legacy that the institutions can actually be able to deliver to individuals, so that when they do meet that career change, that they can say, well, I am a pragmatic thinker who's a very good problem solver, who has a high attention to detail. What does that mean towards the fifth industrial revolution that we are no doubt going to face? So they were some of my key takeouts and key discussion points that I wanted to highlight from Deirdre's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Saxon. And Sara, interested in your views, takeouts.
Thanks, David. Well, I'm not going to go over some of the ones that we've already heard. I mean, I think the fact that the role of the career advisor spans primary all the way through, much more so to adult now, is a really interesting concept, and obviously has some implications in terms of practice and what the needs of older people are and how we're going to help them to upskill and reskill and stay in work. Also the parental influence, not only in terms of the unconscious bias aspect and how that might play through to young people, but also helping parents to have more knowledge of jobs, of what's changing, of the labour market, and how do they get that information, because they're such an important role model and source of advice to young people. And then I'll come back later to the balance between vet and higher education, and Deirdre's amazing statement that people are worried in the UK about the fact that people are turning away from higher education and seeing vet as the more productive and better pathway, which I really wish we were sort of closer to in Australia, but I'll talk about that later. Because what I really thought was the biggest similarity, I suppose, in what Deirdre was talking about in the UK and what's happening in Australia, for me, was the focus on upskilling and reskilling, the fact that we're working and living in a digital age, that we all need to be digitally enabled and have digital skills. and that whilst artificial intelligence and automation are seen by some as taking away jobs, actually they're also providing a massive number of opportunities and changing jobs. So, for example, telehealth, something none of us had really experienced until COVID. People advising in aged care homes and helping people with disabilities to learn how to use technology so that they can have a more productive and fulfilling life and stay at home. There are new jobs emerging because of technology, and helping people to understand how those are transforming different sectors, I think, is going to be really important going forward. Because Industry 4.0, all of the stuff, not just AI and automation, but data analytics and virtual reality and sensor technology, so many different aspects of technology are changing jobs and should be changing people's perceptions of those jobs. But it's hard for people to get that knowledge so that they understand new opportunities that are opening up. So I think, one of the things that Deirdre was talking about was how this was happening in the UK. And I think here in Australia, we need to really focus on improving our digital infrastructure and digital skills, making sure that people have got access to micro-credentials or shorter qualifications so that they can augment what they're already doing with this new knowledge and new capability. But I think for that to work well, we've got to have a bit of consistency in the way that happens, because we've got loads of things popping up at the moment, loads of people doing online courses and all sorts of bits and pieces. But I would like to see some way of us being able to judge the quality of those, the applicability and relevance in the workplace, so that people are doing things that are actually worthwhile and going to help them get a job in the future. So a bit of consistency, a bit of understanding of pathways into work or pathways from school into other qualifications. And I think to be able to help both parents, young people, older workers, and career advisors to know where to get that information. So what's happening in the labour market? What are the skills that are required? A bit like Saxon was saying, those enterprise skills and digital skills are really important. How do we find out what they are, where to get training, what they're going to lead to, and how to decipher all the different data and pathways around those, I think is very important. And people like the National Skills Commission, which is now up and running and is looking at supply and demand in the labour market and what's growing and what's not and how things are changing. And also the National Careers Institute, who have been helping young people look at what the options and choices are going forward. They have a role in helping everybody to understand this new landscape because it has changed. We're looking at a much broader section of society that is requiring advice and going to keep requiring advice throughout their lives, much more so than before. And B, the whole economy has changed. Jobs have been turned upside down in terms of just from COVID, never mind technology change. So I think there's a huge role, and we need a lot of sort of clarity on pathways, information, where to go, all those sort of things. That's my take out.
Thanks so much, Sara. And thanks to all of our panelists. I think, our attendees would agree, some such rich outtakes, I think, of sort of their views on Deirdre's presentation. And thanks for those of you that are contributing, in the chat function about what your takeouts were as well. So I would encourage you to continue to use sort of that chat function to continue the discussion. Obviously the panelists can see that, and we can pick it up as well. One of the things that we thought was important with this particular session is that, we were so lucky, to have someone of the caliber of Deirdre. And I think Deirdre just did an amazing job at also contextualizing as much as she could the Australian context. But she's not in Australia, and she's not on the ground like our panelists are and like our attendees are today. And one of the challenges, I suppose, or one of the tasks that we gave our panelists was to identify what we called were the silencers. So what were perhaps some of those things that maybe are occurring in the Australian context that is worth discussing in relation to sort of the evidence and impact of career development that Deirdre didn't pick up on. So I might go back to Lizzie and just see if there was anything that sort of she picked up or wanted to add in relation to sort of those silences. And again, I would encourage attendees, if there was anything that you thought was sort of you would like to add to the discussion that Deirdre didn't touch on, feel free to throw that into the chat function. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, David, and thanks to everyone else. I've really enjoyed hearing their comments. And I think one of the things that I sort of was thinking about in prompted by Deirdre to think about the gaps and you to think about the silences is something that Sara sort of just mentioned in terms of the availability and accessibility of career information, which has been the subject of quite a lot of my research. And I think that sort of drew me back to this idea of the summits of scalability, of how do we make career development practice scalable, because I am hugely passionate about highly qualified professionals using professional standards, but we can't be everywhere at all times, and we know that. And I think that there's a number and range of kind of ways of delivering career development. But I think that Deirdre mentioned about promoting career conversations, and I think that there's just something that we need to kind of play with ourselves in Australia about how to inform those career conversations of parents, as Sara said, but also in the workplace, in all kinds of settings, that we want to empower people who don't have the qualifications, because to be able to have informed and informing conversations that they feel that they feel help support whoever they're talking to make powerful choices and to gain that agency and being able to use that career information. So I thought that a lot of that sort of Deirdre did touch on, but I thought that challenge of scalability and linked to that sustainability of or just cloning careers counsellors everywhere perhaps was another way of doing that, but I'll throw that to AI.
Thanks, Lizzie. Leela, was there anything that you sort of thought from an Australian context we could add to the discussion?
I'll go back on what Deirdre what Sara mentioned about micro-credentials and also the importance of work for young people when they're at school. So for me, it is how do we build work-related learning, exposure to work for all our students, doesn't matter where they are, whether they've got social capital or not. So every student has access. And I like the Gatsby model where, there is a minimum number of encounters at each year level, and that's actually monitored and tracked. I love that idea. So how do we build this into our curriculum? How do we build this so that this becomes part of their learning? But more importantly, how do we then capture it through micro-credentials so that young people from an early age build this portfolio of skills that they can use, not just to get into the workplace, but also for university entry or entry into tertiary education of any sort. So without an ATAR, for instance, having this amazing bank of skills that demonstrates what they've got, but also how they've progressed in their learning. It can be a really powerful way of demonstrating their career readiness and their work readiness to employers and also to people at universities and TAFEs who are looking for different methods of selection.
Thanks, Leela. Saxon.
I'm not on mute. Great. There's probably two key ones, and I think they're quite intertwined in how they work with each other. The first one being mental health. I think that mental health is such a prevalent topic of conversation, which we're all experiencing in this day and age. Some previous research of ours found that 68% of young people said that they struggle with their mental health throughout their senior years of high school. In a COVID report we did, that number's actually increased to 79%. But it's quite interesting. There's a lot of clinical research which shows that there are a number of different contributing factors to this mental health pandemic that a lot of young people are facing. And a lot of these can be, a disconnect from values, a disconnect from meaningful work or education, the role of working with other people and that community aspect, the role of status and respect, and be able to develop a hopeful and secure future. To kind of anecdotally support that, in understanding young people and students, we found that 76% of students say that they experience high levels of stress when going through the senior years of school. followed by anxiousness, fear, frustration, then a sense of hopelessness or depression, then followed by excited. And if you actually look at that pragmatically, that if a young person's feeling stress, that means that they're incapable of making clear and concise decisions. It's leading to that state of anxiety where they're trying to build pictures of themselves as to who they're going to be or what they're going to be. It's in a sense of frustration. They can't answer that question. They don't know what they're good at. So they will get frustrated within their self, which leads to a fear and it's a fear of making a decision, which quite often leads to just making a decision to buy themselves a time later, which then compounds into more negative associations towards further education or employment because they don't want to drop out or they don't want to quit their job or they don't want to go into further education because they think they're going to fail, which, really compounds into this sense of hopelessness or depression. And I think that when you actually look at kind of mirroring what Deirdre just said about how do we actually increase the work-related learning for a lot of young people, in Sydney on the North Shore, there's just been an introduction of a learning village school in which it's all about project-based, multidisciplinary learning. For many of you here that are attending would probably have seen the documentary Most Likely to Succeed, which is based on a high-tech high, a school over in the United States, which takes this same approach. And I think this is probably something which we're on the bleeding edge of it coming into Australia. And I think a lot of them are quite intertwined. And they're probably my two key takeaways, that if we can actually integrate the idea of making education more purposeful and meaningful, helping students and young people and people or communities and societies as a whole identify those skills that they're innately qualified and driven by, that then leads to their work becoming more compelling, which then drives to looking at an ROI in terms of education and what it means in terms of wealth creation. It means we've got a highly capable, highly motivated workforce because people are more inspired and motivated by their work. So that was probably my two key takeaways. Right, David, you're on mute.
I'm on mute now too, sorry. Sara.
Thank you. So I thought one of the biggest differences or very interesting focus was that I think youth unemployment seems to be a bigger issue here in Australia than it appears to be in the UK, because when Deirdre was talking, she talked very broadly about different groups to focus on that were at a disadvantage. But here in Australia, youth unemployment is a really big issue. It dwarfs some of the other areas. And yes, we have, pockets where we have a lot of unemployment in mature age people or with refugees or people with disabilities. But youth unemployment is really important and growing. And whilst it's been up at about 16.4% during COVID, it still hasn't gone back to where it was. It's still at 13.4%. And that's a problem we're storing up for the future if we allow it to go on, because the rate of becoming re-employed diminishes dramatically as time goes on. So if you go into being unemployed and you have a 21% chance of getting a job within the first, I think it's maybe a month. After that, it goes very quickly back to 3%. And we need to start thinking really hard about youth unemployment and how we prevent it. And a lot of the things that we've talked about today, so exposure to work experience, workplace learning, we're hearing that some schools are turning away from that because of workplace health and safety regulations. It's very difficult to arrange work placement. But exposure to employment doesn't have to just be about work placement. And, all of the research shows that it's about employers coming to talk to schools or, going on a group visit or whatever. So I think we need to think hard about how we improve that. I think the learner profile that Leela was talking about obviously came through really clearly in the Shergold review and the Caplan review. And we really do need to think about how we help young people to demonstrate much wider capability, and that it's not all about the ATAR. That's obviously important in some contexts, but it's not everything. And being able to demonstrate success and ability and capability in a much more diverse way is really going to help young people build confidence and be able to get into work. We need to have employers involved in that because they need to value that expression of capability. And then I think going back to that balance between vocational education training and higher education, we desperately really need to have other pathways so that it's not seen that higher education is the only valid way to go from school into work. It's such an outdated concept in so many other countries. And yet we've tried, and some of you know that I've tried piloting higher apprenticeships in various different contexts, and it's been great, and the employers love it, the young people love it, and they're motivated and passionate, and they do really well. But we haven't embedded having two ways of going when you leave school. One way that's going straight into work and doing qualifications on the job, and one way which is going and studying further and then getting a job. And we need to really focus in on how we create that dual journey or pathway, and help people to understand that both ways are equally valued by employers. So, you know, I think there's quite a way for us to go. And I think that it really hit me about the difference between the focus on youth unemployment here and how important it is, and how we need to stop intergenerational unemployment. And it didn't seem to be such a big issue, or at least it was part of the mix in the UK.
Thanks, Sara. I mean, I think that it's a really interesting point. I think, you know, you raised around exposure to work. And I think, you know, Deirdre made a great point about how do we upskill our practice as practitioners, you know, and also as educators. And I think, you know, we've also seen through, as a result of the pandemic, that there are opportunities for young people to gain work exposure through the use of technology. And, you know, we need to move more into that space. So I think, you know, we do need to sort of think a bit more broadly than the traditional model of, you know, going into a workplace. I know sort of where I, you know, sit as the executive director of CICA, I get lots of inquiries, or have had lots of inquiries sort of from schools during the last 12 months about what do we do now, because, you know, employers can't take our young people because of COVID, you know, so they don't have an opportunity for work exposure. And I think we need to, you know, I think we have to start thinking outside the box about how we provide these opportunities. And we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we know that the majority of work exposure or work placements that young people are exposed to are provided by our small to medium business owners in Australia. And we know that that also places a lot of pressure on them as well. So, you know, the ability for groups, or the ability for them to be able to come into a school to talk, I think we have to start thinking probably a bit more broadly around, you know, how we provide those opportunities for young people to have exposure to work. There's some really great comments that are sort of starting to come through the chat, and I know some of our panelists have been sort of responding to some of those, and some of the comments, you know, might be more specific to some panel members than others. I might throw to you, Lizzie, sort of without sort of putting you on the complete spot, because this probably is a question that's probably more aimed at your understanding, is that there's a question or a comment around whether you believe that the theoretical foundations of career development remain significant today while the context of our delivery is actually changing. Did you want to make a comment on that?
I mean, can I just answer yes, or do you want more? More than that, yeah. I think the theoretical underpinnings of career development for me are a critical part of engagement within the process. I think there's a place for a lot of people in developing, and a lot of stakeholders, a lot of voices in developing the policy on career development. And I think it's really important to have a broad church on that. But I think that having career practitioners and those kind of enmeshed and engaged in research in career development, and I know Mary McMahon is talking tomorrow, and I know that CICA sort of works closely with people who are involved in career development as well as pushing theory forward, is I think that's something that Deirdre mentioned, and I would think is not us being airy-fairy and up in the world, but I think theoretical frameworks and concepts help us understand how we're living in our practices and how policy needs to be formed. So my answer is yes.
Leela, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to add to what what Lizzie is saying. David, one of the things that I get when I talk to careers practitioners in our Victorian schools, so we are having a program of training up, skilling up our careers practitioners in Victorian government schools to undertake the graduate certificate in career education and career development, which gives them the professional status. So when I ask some of them who actually have been working as a careers practitioner without having this qualification, what has changed is having that theoretical underpinning that sort of they can then put the framework around what they're doing. So marrying the design to the implementation has been really, really critical for them. So you can have a really experienced careers practitioner who then goes back and does a grad cert, and it just enriches their knowledge, enriches their implementation. And I think that's really important. It gives them that purpose and the meaning to what they're doing. It's not just rote by rote sort of stuff. There's a reason as to why they're doing it. I think that's a really powerful sort of thing to do. So I really believe in this theoretical underpinnings. I think it's a critical part of anything that we do.
And I think, I would add from CICA's perspective as the national peak body that, career theory should underpin all of our practice, and when we're talking about building evidence bases and the return on investment, it's actually the career theory that should be driving the reason why we should be advocating for greater levels of investment. I think, as both Lizzie and Leela just pointed out, without that theory and without all of that research that's gone before us, then we are just potentially just a group of, people that are around advocating without sort of any basis. And I think that, there's well-entrenched international theories. We have some amazing theorists here in Australia as well. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the busyness of the work that we actually do, that sometimes we lose sight of that underpinning sort of theory.
Can I ask you a question on that? Which was, do you think there has been a change there in terms of some of the things that Saxon was talking about with mental health and the focus on well-being? Do you think that wraps the theory in a slightly different context or an additional dimension that maybe wasn't focused on before?
I might throw to Lizzie and Leela first, and then I'll give CICA's perspective.
I think, Sara, I think that there's some really interesting work by Tristram Hooley from the UK, who talks about the provenance of career development theory and, and draws on theorists. And he talks about the psychological kind of background and origins of the development of career theory. And so, and then the sociological kind of sort of tradition that would come through to it. But so I think that career development, in my view, is a discipline in and of itself. It's its own regional in Bernsteinian terms, which is a bit heavy for today. But I think that well-being and the import of that has been there since the beginning, since the very early parts of career development. And so maybe it's a refinding and a reflecting back and a reaffirming what the purpose of career development is, which sort of also engage with one of the questions about, actually career development shouldn't be just straight, like study job. It should be about a holistic, life-wide, lifelong kind of self-development.
I agree, Lizzie. I think that's exactly what career development is. It's not just any of you call the career theories. They encompass well-being, health, mental health. That's all encompassed. If you go back to the founding fathers of the career development theories, for instance, it's all there. And the older we get, the more important it is to sort of see what's happened. As I started in careers in 1980s to sort of 2020 now working in career development, all this has become even more important. The other missing piece, I think it's not really a missing piece, but I think what the pandemic has actually accentuated is the importance of labour market data in all the work that we do. So where previously, a lot of career development stuff that we did was all around, your skills, your attributes, your values, your goals, and so on. It's really important that we actually shine the light on what are the job trends, what are the upcoming emerging industries, and so on. So it's really important that we actually now look at the availability, the accessibility, and the navigability of labour market data for our not just for our young people, but for everyone, but particularly for our young people, to make those informed choices, which they're going to have to do at various stages in their life. They need to be able to draw on really good, solid labour market data, but also labour market data that they can actually, as I said, which is accessible, navigable, and of course, accurate and so on. But I think I think what the pandemic has done is actually brought that to the fore more than it has previously.
And I think probably, from my perspective, I would agree with both what Lizzie and Leela spoke around, the emergence of sort of mental health, because I think, as society has evolved, we're obviously now seeing a greater prevalence of mental health. And we know that there is some international research which talks about, the role that career development can play in assisting. But I also think it's very important that we don't move too far into that space where all of a sudden we become mental health experts, because that's not what we are either. So I think there's also a trap, and we need to make sure that we don't move into that space and we understand what our lane is, and our lane very much is around career development. And I think that role of mental health and well-being is caught up in the broad definition of career development, which is what Lizzie and Leela have spoken about. But I also think it's important for practitioners to understand and to know in their own profession that they're not mental health experts unless they've got qualifications in that, and when to on refer, I think, becomes really, really important.
Yeah, agree.
I'm going to get to some questions from the audience in a moment, but I might just throw one more question to our panelists to give sort of our attendees an opportunity to throw any questions that they might have, either for the whole panel or for some specific members. This session very much has been around the evidence and impact of career development, and we know that across the world internationally, the largest funders of career development is public funding. It comes from governments. And we know also from the work that we do as the national peak body and the relationships we have with our international partners that some governments are more across this than others. Some see the return on investment and invest heavily. And, I think in Australia, we tend to move in ebbs and flows. And those ebbs and flows, or that roller coaster sometimes that I like to talk about, is not good for our citizens. So when we go through periods of governments investing fully, and then we go through a period of all the investment withdrawn. So we go through all these wonderful programs which are established, and then they're withdrawn. If we have a look at young people, we have things in schools which all of a sudden happen, and then all of a sudden governments change or the funding changes and they're removed. What would be one sort of message that you would give to sort of policymakers? And I know, Leela, you sort of sit in this space, so you might be giving the message to yourself, but what would be a message that we would give to policymakers both at the Commonwealth level and the state and territory level around, what is the one lever that probably needs to be pulled somewhere that allows sort of this thing that we call career development to be sort of embedded and not to be caught on the roller coaster? Anyone can go. I won't pick on anyone.
Saxon's on mute.
So I might just jump in there. I really think that the idea of project-based, multidisciplinary learning is something that needs to be embraced moving into the future. But, I've recently just turned 30 years old, and I look at the variance of people that I work with across, age, demographic, geographic, skills differences, qualifications, and there is such a variance of difference of that experience that you develop through practical learning. And it doesn't change that I work with some people who are at the November stages of their career or people who are just entering. When you have people who understand a problem and that are motivated towards their work and can work within teams and can communicate. Funny that I tripped up on that word. Can communicate, can understand their values and what role they play in terms of a community or in terms of a team and a role. I think this is something which is just, the evidence is there, and it's too undeniable the impact that can actually have moving into the future, rather than it being geared towards academic success. And then because the pressure that applies to someone, that if you don't achieve this mark academically, then you are put into the box of never going to achieve, and you're a failure, and you're then conditioned to thinking that you aren't able to actually achieve. versus someone who may be a high achiever that may achieve higher than expected, to then go off and say, well, I don't want to waste such a good mark. I'm going to go off and do something which is seen by society as a glamorous career, which I think at both ends meet in the same place. And that's people in unfulfilling careers, unfulfilling jobs, which then contributes to various personality and characteristic deficits, and takes away from formalizing, highly capable, highly motivated individuals, in which, when you actually see it, and I think we've all been privy to see what it's like to work with an inspiring leader or with capable teams or in purpose-driven teams, what that really is like. It's infectious, and you produce really high quality work, and you don't mind working the extra hours because you know that your work is actually contributing to something, rather than it being, oh, I'm not of value, I can't contribute here. So I think that in terms of policymakers and looking at it into the future, and going to Deirdre's point around the fourth industrial revolution, the education system has remained remarkably similar for the past 120 odd years. And I think, we've seen that time and time again in documentaries and in reports, that now we've seen the impact of what COVID has done. We've seen how much we all had to pivot into doing digital conferences. We've seen how much industries have been able to adapt very, very quickly. I think now's a time where we can actually start to bring in project-based learning. It doesn't necessarily rely on industry having to take on so many young people. And David, you made a point that, it's a lot of SEMs that are bringing on and doing a lot of work experience. And we've had it firsthand in my own experience of opening up our doors and bringing on work experience. But, the administration that goes into it, the care that has to go into it, the insurance that goes into it, like, it's a lot to provide just that much opportunity for, a 7-day or, a specific hour worth of experience. I think we look at the data as to what is effective, and we can take industry problems, we can take hypothetical problems, we can look at what digital roles and digital meanings are, and then relay that on. I think that is an effective solution, and something which we should really embrace moving into the future.
Yeah, David, I would have to totally agree with Saxon. I think project-based learning in schools, every time I've seen that, whether it's things that Big Picture Education is doing, whether it's PTEC schools, it enables young people to, develop all of those skills about knowing how to work in a team and what role different people can take and how they work, those complement each other. It unleashes innovation, entrepreneurship. It gives them a different experience. And speaking as an employer, we don't look at the ATAR. We don't look at whether someone's been to university or what they've done. We look at how they work with other people, how they communicate. Can they think? How do they communicate? All of those things are the things that we recruit on, and so many other employers do now. So if we started, as Saxon said, to look at revolutionizing the way things are taught in school and teaching a more project-based way, that will also feed into the broader having a learner profile and being able to demonstrate different types of skill and capability. And in turn, that will enable young people to grow in their confidence, understand more about the sorts of things they're good at, the things they might like to do, and be able to explore their passions a bit more, as Saxon said earlier. So I think the two things are linked. This sort of project-based learning, leading into learner profile, leading into exploration of a whole much more diverse set of pathways after school. It's got to be something that would potentially solve some of our issues.
If I could just support that again, sorry to jump in. I think something that we do, and it is very neglected, but I think we need to be able to look at the achievements to the Australian economy, which has happened over the past, 10 to 15 years. Australia is not identified as one of the tech hubs of the world, in comparison to, London or the Netherlands or, San Francisco. But you see, we have more billionaires in the Australian economy now than ever before in the history, which isn't coming from mining and ore. This is coming from technology. You look at Atlassian, you look at Afterpay, you look at Canva. These are things which should be so widely celebrated, and using those guys as case studies and having industry-related problems contextualized into the curriculum and into work experience and highlighting everything that Sara just said. that way we actually are breeding, you know, a real growth mindset amongst young people. We're encouraging entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship isn't mutually exclusive to being the next Mark Zuckerberg. You can be entrepreneurial, you can improve. It's just being innovative. You know, it doesn't have to have the glamorous title. But if you validate someone by saying that's quite an entrepreneurial thought you've had there, it breaks the stigma attached to it, and that way it's then validating the individual. So I think that, you know, now is a time more than ever, especially with what we've all experienced. So, you know, some people here have been in their careers for, you know, 40 odd years, and to now see that we are adapted so quickly to technology, I think it's case in point is the right step into the right direction.
Leela or Lizzie, is there anything you'd like to add, or you're comfortable?
I mean, I can't see Leela, sorry, on my screen. It's probably, I was thinking just back to your original question, David, in terms of speaking to policy and when we speak career development to power, I think one of the important things to think about is that core ideas of career development. I think all that Saxon and Sara have said is really important in terms of implementation and practices, but in terms of policy and understanding what the core of career development is, I think actually Judith Leeson's been commenting in the chat about the origins of career development, about vocations and career theory, but I think that there's also a core part of Rothman's been talking about flourishing, about the flourishing within a career and within a lifelong career, and thinking about it not as a single trajectory, but actually as we're piecing together. And so that ebb and flow does impact people if they have support at one point but not at another. And I think that sustainable, scalable, dependable career support, I think, is really important, that we can reinforce that and build on something and continue to build on something in the future, from very early moments to right through to people transitioning out of retirement, or whatever we call retirement more euphemistically, and that continue just to engaging in the world of work in our communities.
David, I'd like to, if I could, bring it back to your other, another question that you raised earlier, where you talked about roller coaster. The roller coaster of policies coming and going, and governments being interested in career education, and then it disappears and it comes back again, sort of stuff. Look, I speak as not just a policymaker in my day-to-day job. I'm also a mother, a grandmother. I was a careers teacher. I was an advocate for career development. I used to say to careers teachers, sometimes I felt like a surfer, so you sort of, in the water, you're paddling, you're waiting for the surf to come, the surf comes, and then it goes up there, and you're up there, and all the career stuff is happening on investment, so on, then it comes back down again. And what we need to do is make sure that it's more even. We're not just waiting for the next wave to come. We need to sort of make career education, career development embedded in our curriculum. And I noticed in the chat window when I was following it, the importance of having a minister who believes in it, or a senior education bureaucrat who believes in it. And we're lucky in Victoria. We've got a deputy premier who's our education minister, who really, really believes in the transformative effect of career education, and has invested really well in all the reforms that's going on in Victoria. We've talked about parents, we've talked about young people, we've talked about employers, and we've talked about careers practitioners. The one missing link that we haven't discussed is teachers. So teachers are actually a very key influence in young people's career development, career decision making. And we don't do enough to sort of inform them. I mean, they don't understand their own power, actually, but we also don't do enough for them to sort of impart to students the importance of what they're learning to their futures. So what's the importance of history in your future? What's the importance of philosophy or maths or science and so on? That connection between learning and work is really important. And I know that Tristram, we've been talking about Tristram Hawley a lot, his years of learning. We know that University of Derby has done some really good work on the influence of teachers in career development of young people. And we haven't done enough of that in Melbourne, but in Australia. And I do want to put in a plug, though. We must not forget teachers as a workforce. We need to inform them so they can actually support the students that they're teaching. in career education as well. And I think Tristan says every teacher is a teacher of career education. I think that's really important. And I just want to finish on one thing, which is Deirdre's comment, which really, really struck me, which is, and I know you've quoted that before, unless we can demonstrate the link between education and wealth creation, education will remain a footnote in the discussion of finance ministers. Really, we don't want it as a footnote, we want it as a headline item, and that's what I think we need to be working towards, making education and career development a headline item by demonstrating the return of investment, where we've got good career development going on.
Mm. Oh, look, Leela, I think really, I would agree with everything you've said, definitely. It's not the role, as we say, a professional career practitioner plays a role in a school, but can't play the whole role. It's not the whole role of one person in a school of 11 or 1,200 to be the only person who is responsible for career development. I think there's also, when we're talking, policy, I think, there's some definitional issues we need to deal with in this country as well. I think a lot of times when we work with schools, they don't understand the difference between career education, which is curriculum based, and a career practitioner, which is, a specialist who works not necessarily with everybody, but may work, in helping an individual. So I think there's some issues to go there as well. I'm conscious of time, and I did want to pivot just a little bit, because we have spoken a lot about sort of young people and changes in the labour market. I think one thing that Deirdre picked up on, which we haven't spent too much time, and I do want to get some questions as well, is adults. I think post the COVID pandemic, we still have 1.3 million people in this country unemployed. So we've done better, but we still have 1.3 million people unemployed. We have a lot of people that are very highly skilled, higher education qualifications, that have now found themselves unemployed through no fault of their own as a result of COVID. I'm interested in what role policy plays in, it's an equity issue basically. How do we enable these sort of adults or mature age Australians to have access to quality career development to help them with their next transition? Because some of these people are in their 40s, that they can't retire, and the world of work has changed dramatically, and so they need to be supported as well. So I'm just interested in the panel's views on that.
So I last year did a project in Western Sydney helping mature age people who'd come into unemployment back into work, and it was extremely interesting. Everybody had their own story as to what the challenges that they were trying to overcome. And in fact, the return on investment in helping a mature age person back into work is incredible. There's been a lot of data, a lot of studies done by, I think it was Department of Social Services, as was, on that. And if I tell you that we said that we would, I think get maybe 1,000 people or maybe 500 people into work, and we only actually had to get 8 people into work in the entire project for it to break even, because of the lifetime cost of welfare, of associated health issues, or also intergenerational unemployment that can arise from adults in the home being unemployed for a long time. So there was a huge job to do there. But the interesting things were that often the reasons for not being in work were around care, were around confidence, were around mental health issues. Often somebody who'd become unemployed because of a disability, it wasn't the disability that was stopping them get back into work, it was loss of confidence from being out of work. And then there were obviously issues around language and so on. But I think what struck me most was that when adults get into the unemployment services system, and it is changing, they don't really have access to quality advice about options. At the moment, the way it works is that the job actor providers are incentivized to get people into a job, and not necessarily for it to be the right job or a sustainable job. I think going forward, as the new employment services model comes into being, there needs to be a focus on how do we actually help adults find the right thing for them that's going to help them stay in work, and not just be a stopgap or the first thing that comes along. And I think the role of career advice and career guidance and career development in there is very strong, and it's absent at the moment. But when the system changes and people who can sort of get themselves back into employment just do a self-service model, the focus is going to be on providing much more focused and targeted and holistic support to the people who are finding it more difficult to get into the workforce. Now, I think there'll be a whole range of specialist providers that enter that market, but there is definitely a much bigger role for career development, career advice and career guidance in that going forward. And if policy-wise that can be built into the model, I think it would be a really good step forward.
Leela?
David, could I just outline something that's happening in Victoria? This is fairly new. So in the last budget, the 2021 budget, there's a whole lot of investment in Jobs Victoria. So we actually have three different, apart from other things that they're doing under Jobs Victoria, we have Jobs Victoria advocates, we have Jobs Victoria mentors, and Jobs Victoria counsellors. So three different levels of staff who will be working with long-term unemployed or people looking for career changes and so on. The mentors will be linking them to employers who can mentor them. The advocates work face-to-face with job seekers in community settings. And the new ones, which is the Jobs Victoria Career Counsellors, these are new expert careers counsellors who will connect job seekers with practical career and vocational advice. So they will be providing personalised career guidance, and that's really exciting. So exactly what Sarah was talking about. This is the sort of stuff that employment services need. We haven't had it before. We've been putting square pegs in round holes, round pegs in square holes. It doesn't work like that. The focus has been get them into a job. No preparation for it, no looking at aspirations and alignments, hence all the misalignment and unhappy people and unsuccessful, and they don't stay in the jobs. So I think what's happening, I'm being parochial here, but what's happening in Victoria, I think is really exciting. This is new, and it'll be interesting to see how this works out. But I think this speaks a lot for recognising the importance of career development in this space, in the adult space.
I think, David, if I was able to just say something sort of leading on from Leela and referring back to Deirdre and her places and spaces, I think there's some really interesting work developing in this post-COVID. We maybe are all in either very familiar or very new places to us, and some, as Saxon was saying, that's digital spaces and places as well. And I think in terms of a COVID recovery and engaging with adult career transitions and things like this, I think there's an increased focus on taking place-based approaches and community approaches to how we work, where we work, and just emphasising that need for decent work. And I know Ronald Sultanas has done some work recently about thinking about career development as a key guide and as decent work that we need to talk about at all times in our discussions about career aspirations and career transitions and also planetary health. I think there's a lot of work going on where I am at Victorian University about being both place-based and also thinking about the future of the world, the fourth industrial revolution, but also climate change and things like that.
Thanks, Lizzie. Saxon, you just took yourself off mute. Did you want to?
Only if you need.
No, you're just waiting for me to. Look, I'm conscious of time. I think I might just give maybe the panel members. It's been such an amazing sort of over an hour now of rich conversation, and I think we can see from the chat that the engagement from attendees has also been good. I might just ask, just to sort of wrap up, if each of the panel members can sort of give us 1 minute, sort of a closing statement on 1 minute about what's their sort of key takeaway message to attendees today. So I might start with you, Saxon, seeing you've got yourself off mute.
I was kind of hoping you weren't going to choose me then. So remind me what the statement needs to be.
What's your one takeaway message from today to the people that are attending?
I think the most encouraging thing is that this conversation is actually quite progressive. With what was just highlighted then around the elder career changes, I think there is a lot of work that can be done there, and I think that with policy and government looking at how we can actually retrain people. Like, I was reading through a lot of the comments just before about how do we actually, we've got, this a national skill shortage. We've got these digital technologies. What if we took, people who may be at the, in a career transition or maybe being made redundant? What if rather than them relying on the social services system for, going on the dole whilst they try and find work, if we funded them into some of those programs where they can actually go into data, being data analysts or going into some of these careers in which we know are going to be needed by industries? I think these are the same type of questions that we need to be, I'm really happy to see that are being encouraged around also with youth and looking at these industrial revolutions. I think you have to be, you'd have to have the blinkers on to not acknowledge what we've experienced over the past 12 months. And by now seeing that, I think we're all on the same page that these changes are required. And I think the obvious ROI, putting the entrepreneurial hat on right now, that the effect of having highly motivated, highly passionate, highly capable individuals who are in purpose-driven work and see the outcome of their work and see that their skills are being validated is something that which I've experienced. And I think that it is something that can be done at scale. And I think that's probably one of the most encouraging points of today. Just a side note, I've got a few kind of questions that have come through. I don't actually know how I answer them on here because it's not letting me do it. So I will get back to those people who have inboxed me directly.
Awesome. Thanks, Saxon. Sara?
I've spent the whole time while Saxon was talking, listening to him, but trying to think about what the key takeaways were, because there's so many things. I sort of came back to, we need to start at the beginning and break a cycle. And so maybe one of the things that we need to focus in on is, from primary, how do we enable people to see the diversity of choice that's out there and understand what jobs are about? So that that's massive, because it requires talking, getting to all of the stakeholders, the teachers, the parents, the employers, changing perceptions. But I sort of feel like we all know how important education is from early childhood, from 0 to 3, and so many issues with later life occur in that 0 to 3 age group. I'm not suggesting that we do career development at the ages 0 to 3. I'm saying that it's important to start everything early. So if we start at primary and we tackle unconscious bias then, and then we move into, having an education system that revolves around project-based learning a bit more, and we have learner profiles, and we start getting VET and higher education pathways seen as equally aspirational, and we get employers driving the agenda, saying, what it is that they're looking for and helping to educate young people. This is the problem, right? It's everything. All of the things we've talked about today are all the ingredients that we need to create a really thriving population that is fulfilled and fulfills their potential. And, we end up with that return on investment and a thriving economy. I can't split out one thing, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. Leela?
God, like Sara, I love the summary from 0 to 3 up to, adulthood. Look, for me, I suppose, given my work, is a focus on young people. I know we also need to look at adults, but for me, my focus is young people, because that's what that's the basis of my work. We talked about the pandemic and the effect of the pandemic on unemployment of young people. And of course, the unemployment rate for young people has stayed high, whereas the unemployment rate of the adults has been coming down in recent months. What worries me always is all the historical, not pandemics, but GFCs and so on have shown that, and recessions have shown that the young people are the ones who are affected most when there's a recession. It also takes the young people a lot longer to sort of make up that time when the economy recovers. And, the adults sort of, unemployment rate goes down very fast, but the young people's unemployment rate, the catch-up period is longer. So this is why I think the focus on young people is really, really critical. And I agree, we need to start early, get rid of the gender perception, alleviate the gender perceptions and discrepancies, because where there's no social capital sort of stuff. I think it's really important, starting with aspirations for those young people early. But we also need to look at how do we keep our young people engaged longer at school? How do we make sure that they have meaningful and purposeful workplace learning experiences, work-related learning experiences, that they remain engaged at school, they remain they succeed in what they're doing, and they actually transition into education, training, and employment outcomes. I think that's really, really critical. Every young person that we can prevent through either good career education or good engagement or whatever from dropping out of school, can you imagine the return of investment in that? The savings we'll get through social and mental health and physical health savings that we will have. And I think that's one thing that we should all be aspiring to.
Thanks, Leela. And Lizzie.
I'll be super quick because I'm conscious of time, but and I'm drawing on a comment in the chat, and I'm so sorry I couldn't see who it was, but they said the spectre of Carl Rogers is here, and so I'll finish with that I think that the human-centered approach, the Rogerian approach, I think to career development is so important, and something I will take away from to speaking about humans to policy.
Thanks, Lizzie. Look, I just want to take an opportunity to thank all of our panelists. I think you can see from the chat discussion down the side that attendees have found it invaluable and engaging. So I want to definitely, on behalf of our attendees, thank each of our panelists for not only giving of their time, but obviously the preparation work that they needed to do before today. You might have also noticed on the screen that today's session has actually been sketched by Kate at Together Apart, who we're working with as part of this summit. So as part of a takeaway of the summit, these resources will be available post the summit. So as an attendee, you'll be provided with a link to where you can go and get these resources. So to talk about skills in their own sense, Kate, I think, she won't come on the screen, but like an amazing capture of sort of the discussion. I don't know if all our panelists are happy with their sort of caricatures, but anyway, I'll leave that up to them to discuss that with Kate. But, I think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to capture the discussion, which is really, really important. And you would have seen at the end of Deirdre's keynote presentation as well that there was also a sketch of her particular keynote, so that'll be available sort of for you as well. I suppose I just want to finish by thanking everybody for attending day one. Obviously, we have a couple more days to go. If you're joining us for tomorrow afternoon's session, panel discussion around Serena Hopkins' keynote, we look forward to welcoming you at that. If you're one of our invited delegates who will be attending the curated group sessions, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow on that. You should have all received the links to attend that, and that obviously is being facilitated with us, with the people from Together Apart. So thanks everybody for your participation. Thanks for your attendance. We hope that you found it enlightening. I think it was a great way to kick off day one of the summit. So thanks for your participation. Thanks again to our panel, and enjoy your evening, everyone.
Thanks, David. Bye.